This is the WGBH Forum Network.
The Creative Method. The National Association of Educational Broadcasters presents Leopold Stokowski on conducting. Here first is Lyman Bryson.
How does a conductor bring together all the elements in an orchestral performance? How does he feel that he knows all a musical score can express, so that he can, with his knowledge of instruments and players, create a great performance? Here from our conversation on conducting is Leopold Stokowski's answer.
First, I study the score physically, so to speak. I mean by that, what are the notes, what are the rhythms, what are the harmonies, what are the melodies, what is it like physically? Then gradually I try to penetrate into the psychological side of the score. What was the inspiration of the composer? What feeling, what inner psychological message does he want to convey through that score? Now, that might be, the message might be something extremely great, deep, serious, or it might be something very gay and light, the joy of life. It could be all kinds of things, because music expresses every possible emotion or experience that the human mind and the human spirit knows and experiences in life.
You're listening to Leopold Stokowski on conducting. The Creative Method. The conductor as creator. One of 10 conversations with creative Americans about the nature of their work. The Creative Method, prepared by WGBH-FM in Boston under a grant from the National Educational Television and Radio Center. Later, we'll tell you how you may obtain excerpts from this and 21 other radio essays on the creative process in American arts, sciences, and professions. But now, Leopold Stokowski on conducting. And here is Lyman Bryson.
I suppose if you undertake to prepare something for concert, you've already heard it actually played before you begin this analysis, or do you begin that? You go at the score fresh, so to speak.
They are of course, I like to conduct the great music of the great masters. Naturally, we all like that. But I like very much to conduct music that never has been conducted before. The contemporary music being created by young composers all over the United States and all over Europe and in Asia too. I'm receiving very interesting things from China and Japan and India and Asiatic countries too.
In Western modes that fit our orchestras?
Yes. Naturally, they have to be for our instruments, although the feeling of the music can be of their culture. But our instruments have to play it, because we do not have the instruments of those, for example, the Arabic instruments, or the Japanese, or the Chinese instruments, the Hindu instruments, we do not have. But the great thing about music to remember, I think, is that it has two sides to it. Just as we have our physical side, our body and our life, and the way we live our life. Oh, Cadillacs and Fords and gasoline stations and drugstores and all those material things which make up our life, eating and drinking and so forth. But we also have our inner life, which is something quite different, absolutely of another nature. Our life of feeling, of dreams, of perhaps of religious feeling, of cultural things, our delight in the arts, our delight in nature, everything that goes on inside of us, the inner life, that shows the other side of our life. And music is the same way. Music has its physical being and its non-physical being. It's psychological or how shall I never could find the right word for what I'm trying to say now, but it's not the physical side. It's not just playing or singing the right notes and the right tempi and the right rhythms and all that. That's the physical side, but there's the other side.
You wouldn't call it spiritual?
It is sometimes spiritual. For example, in music of Bach and Beethoven, and Brahms, it's often spiritual. But in certain kinds of creative jazz, it's just joyous rhythm and carefree love to dance and be happy together.
Perhaps we might call that spiritual too, without degrading the word.
Yes, all right, if you wish. Of course, it's well to differentiate between the music of the great masters, the serious music, the profound music of the masters, and that gay, carefree music that our jazz composers create. Some of it, in my opinion, is very important because it does not look back to old forms, but it has the courage to create new forms, new kinds of rhythm, new kinds of orchestration, to use new sounds, new instruments. And these gradually come into the more symphonic type.
Does there seem to you to be an emotional or spiritual meaning in the work when you begin to analyze it, to look at it? Well, when does it come to you as a spirit, as a meaning?
Only very slowly. It really takes me, I'm slow, it takes me years to find that real inner message. For example, the music of Brahms or Beethoven or Bach and many other composers, I am constantly finding new depths in it, new meanings, a new nuance of emotion. And it takes many performances and many rehearsals and much study and much a kind of thought, analytical thought, to gradually find the true depth of meaning. And that seems to me sometimes that such meaning is infinite, that it goes on forever and ever. It just depends on the limitations that are in me, in my limitations. Otherwise, I would understand it more.
But of course you don't wait for this exhaustion of meaning. You don't wait to get it all. You start out with something. No. You have to. Now, how do you explain to your orchestra?
I don't explain anything to the orchestra.
You don't explain to the orchestra?
I never talk to... The less the
conductor... The orchestra doesn't understand the spirit of it unless they understand it by themselves.
No, but the less the conductor talks, the better. We take the first rehearsal. Anything goes wrong, I stop and try again and put it right. We make the second rehearsal. By that time, there usually are no mistakes. The third rehearsal. Now we are finding more sensitive forms of expression and greater freedom of rhythm. And by the fourth rehearsal, we have still greater freedom and more eloquence of expression. And then come the concerts, one or two concerts, usually pairs of concerts. I like to conduct pairs of concerts. And then gradually that inner spirit begins to emerge and become clear.
And does the orchestra know what that inner spirit is at all?
I don't know. I never ask them any such questions because I think it is perfectly clear that when they play well and with understanding of the music, not understanding of the head, but understanding of the heart, through the heart, they understand the feeling of the music. It is quite clear that they, to some degree, have understood that. But of course, it takes years to more fully understand.
That would depend somewhat, wouldn't it, Mr. Stokowski, on how much that orchestra had worked with you or with any other conductor? No. Good orchestra is an instrument.
No. A good orchestra is a number of wonderful players with good instruments in their hands and mastery of those instruments. Whether they've ever played together before or not is much less important than most people think.
Is there anything mysterious in the way in which a good conductor gets out of an orchestra what he wants?
There's no greater mystery in the whole world, in my opinion. I believe I can do it, but I don't know how. All I know is that I feel the music a certain way, and I look at the players and ask of them, not by words of course, but just by looking at them, a certain kind of phrasing, a certain kind of feeling, and they give it. Now, what is that form of communication? I don't understand, but it is a form of communication. Some conductors have it and some do not. I believe I have it, but perhaps that's just, perhaps I'm prejudiced in favor of myself, which...
You seem to have companions in that prejudice.
Oh, thank you. You mean some other conductors are that way?
If there are mysteries of that sort, are there any mysteries in the way in which you appreciate or understand or grasp the meaning of the music? Is this a matter just of training? How much of it is in your natural gift as a musician? Must be a great deal of it.
I don't understand it very much. I think I have a talent for conducting. Perhaps I'm, again, prejudiced. But after that, it's just a question of study, study, study. I'm studying all day and every day, new scores. You see all these scores on these shelves here. I'm studying these things. And it cannot be done, no matter whether, if one does have talent, it cannot be done without very deep, intense study and constant study. Because just as space is infinite, so is music infinite. All the arts are infinite. All the possibilities of life are infinite. And everything in our life is really very mysterious. That life exists at all is mysterious.
Some people say, Mr. Stokowski, that it's better not know too much about music when you're listening, that the conductor will give you what he wants you to have, and you shouldn't yourself know too much about the music. Have you any feeling about the audience in a case like this? What do you think about your audience when you're conducting, or do you think about them at all?
No, but I think about them at other times. But while conducting, the modern orchestra is extremely complex. And while conducting, one must watch every instrument, every player. Because even if you have, as we have in every orchestra, many violin players, for example, we have perhaps 34 or 36 or 38 violin players. They all have the same instrument, but not really. All violins are different. I never saw or heard two violins that were alike in the whole world. All bows are different. The hands of the players are different. The inner life of those players, their ancestral memories are different. Their nervous systems are different. Their ways of approach to music are different. Their education in music. So it is extremely complex. And while conducting, one must concentrate on the music and the bringing together of all the different instruments and different groups of instruments in their right proportions, so that they balance, the sounds balance, so that you achieve clarity of sound, so that the listeners can understand what is important, what stands out in relief, so to speak, which instruments sound out more prominently than the others, and what are in the background. Just like in the picture, certain things in the foreground are important, and in different planes behind them are more distant objects or more distant colors. So it is in music. There are many planes, so to speak, and some are very prominent, some are less prominent, some still less prominent, and some very soft in the background. If those planes are not in proper proportion, then the music does not sound clear, and the listener naturally cannot understand.
Do you think that the spiritual meaning, as we were calling it a while ago, of the piece of music is conveyed to a listener who doesn't get these subtleties of structure?
Oh, of course, yes.
He doesn't have to understand the structure of the music.
No, every listener is different. There are probably about 3 billion people on this little planet that we live on, and all those 3 billion people are different. They're no two alike. And that's true of listeners. They all approach it by a different way. But I think that's one of the great things of American life. The big thing is freedom. The freedom to listen to music the way you like to have your own feeling and your own ideas and your own, if you like, criticism of the music. But that freedom is a wonderful thing. And everybody should listen to music, in my opinion, their own way, not try to imitate anybody else. Otherwise, their impression of the music will become confused and not clear.
Going back to the question of the relation between the orchestra and the composer, or the conductor, rather, Mr. Stokowski, is the understanding that the conductor has of the capacities of the individual members of the orchestra influenced in any way by his own relation to any instrument? Does he have to be himself a solo performer, or is that of any help to him? I know some conductors are and some aren't.
Yes. A conductor should, in my opinion, understand every instrument in the orchestra.
Well enough to play it?
He should have played it sometime in his life, yes. Particularly the stringed instruments. I was fortunate that my first instrument was the violin when I was a little child, so that the string instruments seemed natural to me. But later I studied wind instruments, woodwinds and brass instruments, and played them myself, so as to understand the difficulties which every player has. Because sometimes composers ask of an instrument what is against its nature. But the big thing to remember is that the orchestra and its conductor are only means to an end. The important things, they are relatively unimportant. The important things are the composer and the listener. The composer, will take a really great composer like Beethoven, had certain inspiration. It's the duty and privilege of the orchestra and conductor to try to convey those ideas, those inspirational ideas, clearly to the listeners. So we are only means to an end. The end is the conveyance of inspiration and beauty from great masters to sensitive listeners.
I've heard it said, Mr. Stokowski, that there's too much music in America, that the radio and the records have so flooded people with music that there's no discrimination and they're being pushed into careless hearing, which doesn't...
Oh, it's nonsense. That's just nonsense. Nobody has to listen to the radio unless he wants to. Nobody has to buy a record and take it home and listen to it unless he wants to. Again, it's freedom. The great thing of this country is freedom. I travel in many countries, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in South America, in Central America, and always when I come back here I have this sense, this wonderful sense of freedom. And through this freedom, although it's true that there is a great deal of music in this country, by radio and television now, records, motion pictures, all kinds of ways, but nobody has to listen to it unless he wishes to.
Are we expressing this freedom that you find so important in the new music? Is it getting into our music?
I couldn't tell you, but if I have the pleasure of meeting you about 200 years from now, I can answer your question.
Takes that long for music really to make its meaning clear?
I think it's taken a long time, for example, for us to really evaluate the greatness of Shakespeare. I think he has now a new life through motion pictures. Shakespeare's going into a new dimension, so to speak, and more people in his time, probably 200 or 300 people listened to his plays and saw his plays, and now millions do. So It's hard to tell what will be in the future and what will be regarded as great in the future. But I do think it takes time, and for music, it takes time and many hearings to really evaluate any composition.
Does the content of music, then, this spiritual meaning of music, remain the same? For instance, what Mozart was trying to say to his people, or did say to his people, is he saying the same thing to us?
Oh, no, because life is so different. It's a good example that you mentioned, Mozart. He lived in a time really before the French Revolution and the American Revolution, when life was very, very different, and people lived much more slowly. For example, their time was not so crowded as today, and they were not moving about so fast, and things were much more tranquil, and they had a certain feeling of perhaps polite beauty, and we are more we are different today. Hard to describe how we are today, but I think that Mozart, to me, Mozart is a kind of ideal beauty. When sometimes I have great troubles in my life, I find consolation in Mozart's music almost more than in any other composer.
Is it possible, you say that you feel that you have yourself a talent for being a conductor. Is this a talent that can be recognized early in young people and trained?
Oh, yes, yes. I think talent in music grows and shows itself more clearly than almost any other talent.
Including the talent to be a conductor?
I'm not sure of that, but taking Mozart, for example, what an extraordinary boy he was, and Mendelssohn also. Some of the early compositions of Mendelssohn, which are almost forgotten now, are amazing. What he did when he was 16 and 17 years old, he wrote masterpieces at that age, when most boys are playing baseball and having a gay time that way. This man was creating masterpieces, and of course Mozart was too.
The reason I ask that, Mr. Stokowski, is because we're also interested in finding, in surrounding any young people we have with talent, with the proper conditions to bring that talent out, not to encourage them too much, but not to encourage them too little. What do you do with a young person who shows musical talent?
Well, I think it's very much like the vegetation of this earth. I'm a farmer at heart. I love nature, and I have a farm which I like very much. Vegetation to grow needs sunlight and air and water and the minerals that are in the earth. Similarly, musical talent needs conditions. It should not be so luxurious, no, because luxury often corrupts people. On the other hand, it's terrible to think that such a great genius as Schubert practically starved all his life and died much too soon. Mozart died much too soon too, because although Mozart was very famous, he was on the edge of starvation most of his life. We have big talent in this country, not only in the big cities, but all over the country. We should try to understand it and give it good conditions. Particularly, composers need performance so that they can listen to their music. When a painter paints a picture, he puts the colors on the canvas, and he can go off at a distance and look at it and see if it's the way he wants it to be, and he finds certain things not yet right. He goes close again and keeps working at that until he has it the way he wants it to be, and then he says it's finished. A composer writes little blank marks on paper, and when he's finished doing that, it's not yet finished. He must listen to it. He must see, has he achieved what he aimed at? And if he can hear it many times, he will then gradually change it until he's finally satisfied. But he cannot do that while it's still, so to speak, without life on paper. It must be brought to life. So he must have performances. And the young, talented composers of today are not having enough performances.
Leopold Stokowski on conducting. And here again is our host and commentator for The Creative Method, Lyman Bryson.
Mr. Stokowski insists that if we are going to develop to its full extent the talent which we have in this country for great musical performance of all kinds, then young musicians must have a chance to perform. Young composers must have a chance to hear their work performed. People who are aspirants to be conductors must have a chance to conduct. I think sometimes we forget this because musical culture in America is so rich by reason of recorded music and broadcast music. We forget that the reproduction of classics, even the reproduction of new, sensationally known virtuosos, does not give the young musician much chance to make his way. And talent in music, like every other talent, can't be developed without exposing itself to public approval or public criticism. Mr. Stokowski thinks that you can't exhaust a great score, that the meanings that there are in it, that the conductor can find if he works at it hard enough and sincerely enough, are inexhaustible. On that account, naturally, he thinks that one never gets to a point of knowing all there is that a composer has to say. And you will note that when he discusses the creative work of the conductor, he's describing a collaborative effect. He's describing a collaborative effort. He's saying that the conductor must know all instruments, how to play them, have played them himself if possible. He must know what can be expected of the men who have these instruments in their hands. But above all, he must know what he thinks the composer intended to say. And as conductor, it is his business to see that the orchestra in its final performance comes as close as possible to that conception of the meaning of the music as the composer wrote it. I think it's worthwhile calling attention also to the fact that in this series of talks about the creative method, practically every one of our guests, these men who represent creative effort, have said the same things to the young person. They have described the creative method as something one gets into by reason of courage, of moral character, as Mr. Sherry said, but there is a series of things which are necessary. Nobody can get very far without talent, of course. But the mistake that the young person makes so often to think that talent alone and temperament are enough. No. After that, you must have the widest possible general education. How are you going to search for the meanings that a great composer put into a score unless you know a good deal about the world? Then you must have your technical training. You must know all about the instruments, the resources that you have in your work, whatever it is. Then you must have courage and conviction which will enable you to put in the amount of hard work, the industrious devotion which is necessary to succeed no matter what gifts you bring to the task. And then, and this interested me especially, nearly every one of them, even Mr. Stokowski, as an orchestra conductor, said never get away from nature. Always bring yourself back to that out of which we all came, and which the creative method is one of our ways of searching and using for the development of our spirits as men and as citizens of the world.
Thank you, Dr. Bryson. You've heard Leopold Stokowski, the conductor, as creator. One of 10 conversations furthering our understanding of creativeness in American arts and professions. The Creative Method is recorded by WGBH FM in Boston under a grant from the National Educational Television and Radio Center. Producer Jack D. Summerfield with Lorland Thatcher and Bill Cavness as production associates. The Creative Method is distributed by the National Association of Educational Broadcasters.